Welcome, everybody. My name is Frances Hasso. I'm in gender, sexuality, and feminist studies. And if you have any questions, I'm also the director of undergraduate studies. So if you want to major in GSF, just let me know. So I have the pleasure of introducing Greggor Mattson, who is a professor and chair of sociology at Oberlin College and Conservatory, and the past director of the program on gender, sexuality, and feminist studies. I know Greggor because I was a professor at Oberlin College for 10 years, one of two faculty members in Oberlin's version of GSF, Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies, which I helped rename, just like I helped rename this one. And I was a member of the faculty in the sociology department at Oberlin. I take credit for spotting the sharpness and intellectual magic Greggor brings to the table during one of those horrible departmental speed dating interviews with potential job applicants at a meeting of the American Sociological Association, which maybe was in New York City. What city? Yeah, was it New York or Philly?
No, it was in New York City.
It was New York. Okay, so as my colleague, he continued to be brilliant even when I asked the hardest questions. So he is the author of Who Needs Gay Bars? Bar Hopping Through America's Endangered LGBTQ plus Places, which my GSF senior capstone students read and wrote about for this week, and which will be the focus of his presentation today. He also published The Cultural Politics of European Prostitution Reform, I love this title, Governing Loose Women, a fascinating book that everyone should read that addresses the puzzle of why Scandinavian countries or North European countries are avowedly feminist, yet have such different policies towards sex work. He has published articles in journals such as Urban Studies, Socius, Comparative Studies in Society and History, City and Community, Metaphor and Symbol, and Teaching Sociology. His writing can also be found in venues such as the Washington Post, Lit Hub, and Salon. He holds degrees from the University of California, Berkeley, Oxford, and the George Washington University. We'll have time for questions and comments at the end, and there'll be a book signing during the reception. I brought my book. If you would please join me in welcoming Greggor Mattson.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks also to Frances for the invitation and for Julie for coordinating, and then all the people who made all the tech work. So it's so nice to be here. You have such beautiful facilities. The GSFS program at Oberlin has nothing. Has nothing.
And that's not why.
Oh, it has people. It has beautiful people, but it has no pink room.
Yeah.
Which, as I told Julie, whenever I saw Pink Parlor, I can only hear the Pink Panther theme song. So I share that with you. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about where this project came from. Then I'm going to read to you one of the chapters. So if you read the book, you will find it perhaps familiar, though with more images. And then I'll give you some parting thoughts, and then I hope we can have a conversation at the end. So the first I'd like to say is I got into this project because almost 10 years ago, my favorite gay bar in Cleveland closed. It was called A Man's World. It was kind of a dump in a certain sense. I won't play this video because it's too long, but what I liked about A Man's World was when I moved to Cleveland, it was a Black majority city with a significant Puerto Rican and Middle Eastern populations, and most of the gay bars were almost completely white. And I moved to a region and I wanted to go to a place that looked like the city that it was in. Now, it was mainly only cis men at this place, but it was an old school gay bar that had blacked out windows, so you couldn't see from the outside. You had to ring a buzzer to get in the door, and there was a little camera that would let you in, but not others. They had the most extravagant holiday decorations. It would look like a Christmas tree threw up in there. And then all that would be packed away, and then immediately would be Valentine's Day and St. Patrick's Day, like always just, they had boxes and boxes of Christmas decorations. And it also was this community hub that had, in its day, hosted a country western dancing society and an HIV/AIDS prevention charity and the local Cleveland Leather Awareness Weekend, CLAW. Now that I've told you, you're aware. But it's raised more than $1 million in the last 20 years for HIV/AIDS and other local charities. So it was really this hub of the gay scene in Cleveland. And when it closed, I was appalled at the reaction in two ways. First, a little article in a local newspaper quoted this local white gay man as saying, "We don't need gay bars in Cleveland. Every bar I go to with my friends is a gay bar." And I was like, well, maybe for you, but is that true for everybody? And so I was appalled at that. And secondly, I was appalled because journalists would write what the redevelopers said, and they called this a toxic nowhere that was empty of people, but full of drug dealers and prostitutes. And I'm like, you can't have it both ways. It's not empty and full at the same time. And I knew that the people they were calling prostitutes were just trans women who were smoking outside their AA meeting, which was across the street. And the drug dealers were just Black guys who were talking to each other on the corner. It was neither. So in a rage, I wrote a piece for a local magazine that got published, and it got 10,000 views in the first weekend. So it was the first time I wrote anything that people really read. And the developer threatened to sue me. And he wrote emails to the president of the university and the dean demanding that he demanded that I undergo peer review. But the thing that the bar was itself run down. It wasn't gender inclusive, and yet it had a special magic. And this is a video on YouTube of a puppet show. There was this random guy who would come set up puppet shows in the courtyard. And this one, it's a dog playing Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy and Company B. You know, homosexuality takes many forms, and sometimes that form is a puppet show. And there wasn't any information about gay bars, and I needed a new project. And really what it was I wanted to read a book about gay bars, and there wasn't one. So I set out to write that book. I did all of this. So I confined myself to the previous 25 years because coincidentally, I had come out 25 years before, just before I turned 21 and started going to gay bars. And I also was propelled by this feeling of righteous indignation in two directions. One, towards people who were dancing on the graves of gay bars and saying we didn't need them. Like, that made me indignant. But I also was kind of indignant at the often older white gay men who said every gay bar is a national treasure and must be saved. Because frankly, I've been to plenty that need to change before they have earned their place in our contemporary LGBTQ+ world. So I wanted to know, how were gay bars these days serving the vast diversity of the LGBTQ+ community? And I came to explore the role of ambivalence. It was so hard to square all of the things that the bar owners and managers who I interviewed. I interviewed 130 bar owners and managers in over 300 bars over 39 states. So I was really casting a really wide geographic net. And owners would say these contradictory things, and they're only contradictory if you have a very literal mindset, because actually all people, we can hold two opposite views in our mind at the same time. And for queer people, that ambivalence is this. We want our own spaces, and we want to live in a place where we don't need our own spaces. And those two desires are in us each, and they operate at different times, depending on how old we are, whether we're single or not, whether we're introverts or extroverts. But this ambivalence is present in our critiques about gay bars in terms of there's the queer radical critique that these are just capitalist vultures that are making money off community. And then there's this uncritical celebration or mythologization of Stonewall as the place where all gay rights sprang from. So we had lots of thoughts, but not a lot of data. So one of the things I did was build a data set. I'm a sociologist. So there's the Damron Guide. They are these bricks that kept track of LGBTQ plus places. It was published annually from 1964 onwards until 2019, when it slowly died. And it's been edited by a lesbian since 1992. So they were thinking in a gender inclusive way. It shifted with the times. These guides, if you ever have your time to lay your hands on them, they're totally quirky. They have their own code. I can't remember what the codes are, but they're bizarre. Like G doesn't stand for gay, it stands for girls, not L. L stands for leather, not lesbians. But in these guidebooks, I could count how many gay bars were in each city in the country across time. And this took 2.5 years, and it took, I think, 7 undergraduates working for me over the course of 3 summers and 5 semesters. And because I was also interested in the impact of the COVID-19 public closure orders, we did a gay bar census in 2021 and in 2023. So we had data looking at 2019 right before COVID-19 and then the data afterwards. And gay bar censuses are fun. I mean, we deep dives down Instagram to try and calculate, are at least 25% of the people in this room people of color? As scientific as we could be. But what we found was there's been a 45% reduction in the number of gay bars between 2002 and 2023. Now, how this 45% reduction hits depends on where you sit. If you're in a big city like Chicago or New York, it may mean that there's just a couple fewer choices of many similar bars to go out. Or it could mean that the only bar that allows 18-year-olds has closed, as happened in Cleveland in 2017. Or it could mean that all the bars serving queer people of color closed, as happened in San Francisco when the bars for Asian Americans, Latinx, and Black folks closed. Or it can mean that the bar with the drag stage closes, demolishing an arts scene that had used a bar as its hub. Or it can mean that the only LGBTQ plus place has winked out of existence, as happened when the only gay bar in Joplin, Missouri closed. Equality rocks. So the question that I pose in the book, Who Needs Gay Bars, is sort of a double one. The question, who needs gay bars, is very different whether you're sitting in Manhattan, New York, the city that has the most gay bars in the country, or Manhattan, Kansas, a city that has 0. Also, the popular explanations for gay bar decline didn't square with what I knew about what was going on in Cleveland. Although gentrification is certainly a huge issue on the coasts, in the Rust Belt and in many of the cities of the interior, our problem isn't redevelopment, it's lack of development. The national banking market after deregulation means that local savings accounts go sloshing to the coasts looking for returns, depleting our capital reserves, but also sweeping along our young people and our gay bar patrons as well. I don't know what, and also, we'll go back. Apps, people would blame it on apps. Well, the decline happened much earlier than the apps, and apps were not associated with lesbian bar decline. And there were actually increases in the number of bars serving all genders after the apps debuted. So apps were hitting bars that only serve cisgender men, but not other types of gay bars. So given this kind of complex picture, I decided I needed to go talk to people. And at the beginning, I was targeting gay bar owners who'd been in the business for 20 years or more, because I thought these are the people who have account books with quantitative income about how gay bars had changed. But after a while, I became very promiscuous, and I would just interview any gay bar owner, including like, why did you get into this business? You just opened a gay bar. They're closing everywhere. Are you opening a buggy whip factory in an automobile world? And I collected their stories. So I'm a sociologist. We think methodologically. I had a multi-method project. So the data set has over 15,000 tracks, more than 15,000 gay bars in the US from 1972 onwards. I visited more than 300 gay bars. For scale, at the time that I was doing it, there were about 720 gay bars in the US. So I visited, more than a third of them, put 10,000 miles on my car. I'll never get that back. I had done ethnography in San Francisco's 3 gay neighborhoods when I was in grad school. So I had data, 15 years worth of data on 47 bars in one big city with gay neighborhoods. And then I visited, did interviews in 38 states plus the District of Columbia, which I count as a state, because it should be. The outcome was a book. Unlike my previous book, I wanted to write for my friends. I wanted to write for the guy at the bar, including guys who don't read very much. So I wasn't interested in doing an academic book, although I fetishize Duke University Press. It publishes the best queer stuff around. And I have a book proposal that I had dreamed of sending to Duke University Press, but I decided that wasn't the book I wanted to write. I wanted to write a book that the guy at the bar or my friend from high school would read, and they did. So I got a literary agent. One of my goals in the book is I want to provide the business strategies that are working and sort of open them up to other bar owners so that they could sort of share knowledge with each other. And to that end, in my IRB protocol, I said I was going to name people so that no one would say, Greggor Mattson says the best way to open a lesbian bar is to do this. Because Greggor Mattson has never run a lesbian bar, nor has he ever opened a business. So don't credit me, credit the person who's running the business. But I also wanted to empower patrons, because bars are also containers for collections of people. And sometimes the bars aren't serving our needs, but rather than abandon them or leave 1-star reviews on Yelp, I thought, what if we had the tools ourselves to make the requests of our owners and managers so that the places would serve what we need from them today, which may not be what the folks needed from them 10 years ago. It ended up landing with the university press. I had no idea that there were trade imprints of university presses, so it's a crossover book, but it's got 39 chapters. And I don't know that I had read a book that had 39 chapters that wasn't a sci-fi or fantasy novel, but it turns out I really love writing short form, and I'm happy to talk about writing short form. And to give you an example of how short these chapters are, I would like to read one of them for you now. And this is chapter 36. And it's called AIDS Altars in Plain Sight. And the bar is the Raven. Each chapter is organized around one bar in a different city, hence the bar hopping. And this is in Anchorage, Alaska. You can't write about gay bars without writing about AIDS. The topic is difficult for me. It's important, it's something that preoccupies me, and it's something I prefer not to think about. This was the second to the last chapter that I wrote out of the 39, not for the lack of the subject's importance. No other force than HIV/AIDS has shaped my gay life more, even as, through sheer luck, I have remained seronegative. My formative gay years of the early 1990s were filled with the mass death and disappearances of my elders, and a couple of my own peers were taken from me as well. But AIDS has driven my fears, at times my self-loathing, and always lurks in the background of my current happinesses. More than 14% of gay bars closed during the depths of the AIDS pandemic between 1987 and 1992. For epidemiologists, the remaining gay bars were low-hanging fruit where well-meaning straight researchers could find a high-risk population that was hard to reach. But gay bars were much more than vectors of a virus. They were tender places of caring and support. They were among the first places where gay men organized in defense of their own health in the face of utter social neglect. They're the places where seroconversion was first disclosed to friends, mouth to ear in the thumping din. Their patios are sites of memorials and repositories of scattered ashes, hallowing their grounds. And gay bars are the places you would scoop up free condoms from fish bowls to cope with HIV/AIDS. In my eyes, those little buckets of condoms are AIDS altars in plain sight. An altar is a site of sacrifice and prayer. An AIDS altar recalls the pandemic's victims, but it also offers small latex intercessions for the living. The ever-refilling buckets of condoms in gay bars recall the late artist Felix Gonzalez Torres's candy spill sculptures, in which visitors are invited to take a piece from an installation that slowly shrinks. And if you have a chance to see one of these candy spill sculptures, I find them incredibly moving. One called Untitled Revenge features colorful blue candies in a large square on the ground, as large as a grave. Many of his works memorialize lovers and friends lost to HIV/AIDS, the shrinking piles of candy mirroring wasting bodies in whose loss the visitor is now complicit. Taking a condom from a gay bar's bucket is a prayer, making you complicit in a future intercession for another, a poignant act of solidarity with the lost and the living simultaneously. The buckets of condoms in gay bars are so ubiquitous that they pass below consciousness, as unremarkable as rainbow neon beer signs or stacks of flyers and newspapers at the door. Many of these condom containers still have signs nearby that encourage patrons to take some to protect themselves. But the little known story of those signs and the scientific evidence for their usefulness is the story of an undergraduate at the University of Alaska and the then 3 gay bars of Anchorage. Even provincial gay bars can have global histories. Tammy Jo Honan didn't know that her 1990 undergraduate thesis would go on to be cited by public health professionals for the next 30 years. Upon my invitation to an interview, she said, "My husband just put it on the internet and he saw it was described as have a martini and a condom, and that wasn't it at all." She had designed a simple experiment in her senior research seminar taught by the late Professor Chris Klenke in 1989. She wondered if signs could increase the amount of condoms taken by customers. She recalled, "That was the heyday, at least in Alaska, of the AIDS epidemic. So I just thought, what can we do to encourage using condoms? I think Alaska was way behind the East Coast because my brother lived in New York City." Tammy Jo approached 15 bars to see if they would post signs above fish bowls of free condoms. All 3 of the gay bars in Anchorage signed on. She doesn't recall their names, but the 1989 Damron lists them as the Raven, the Jade Room, and the Village. She had no hesitation in approaching these gay bars. Quote, "My brother was gay, my sister was gay. I had a lot of gay friends. I didn't feel awkward going into the bars. I just told them what I was doing and hoped what it would do, and they were on board." None of the 12 straight bars, however, would participate. As she recalled of the late 80s in Alaska, it was a pretty closeted place, Anchorage. It was all about, see my rig and gun. Your rig was your big truck and your gun rack was there in the back. As Tammy Jo continued, they said, I just don't want any part of that, probably because I told them that my goal was to affect the AIDS pandemic. The signs, which went on to be footnotes in the global fight against HIV/AIDS, and they were in a public health textbook that I consulted. They said, in the state of Alaska, 38 people have died from AIDS. Many more have tested positive. Condoms can reduce the spread of AIDS. When the signs were present, patrons took 47% more condoms than when they were absent. And as the research paper summarized, because free condoms and educational pamphlets were already available prior to the study, it would appear that the signs functioned in a prompting capacity. The other finding that was cited, all 3 of the gay bars volunteered to keep the signs after the experiment ended. For the owners of the Raven, the Jade Room, and the Village, participating in community health promotion was its own reward, a reflection of gay bars' not quite for-profit missions. Of those 3 Anchorage gay bars that played a role in this footnote in AIDS history, only the Raven has survived. It's one of only 2 gay bars in the largest state in the Union, a city that contains more than half of the state's population. For a city of less than 300,000 people, Anchorage feels really spread out, simultaneously larger and emptier than many cities of its size. This is fitting for a state that is uncritically obsessed with its frontier status, and for a city whose municipal boundaries are larger than the state of Rhode Island. When I visited with my parents in April, it snowed almost every day, so we found warmth at the Raven's Horseshoe Bar at happy hour, where the regulars gather on weekdays to watch the local 5 o'clock news, providing sharp running commentary and restaurant recommendations to visitors. The Raven's logo is still a Native American formline image of a raven, perhaps apt that 10% of Anchorage's population is indigenous. Anchorage attracts peoples from all over the region and the tropical Pacific as well. The logo adorns a tall billboard framed by the Chugach Mountains in the distance, making it easy to find the freestanding green building in a light industrial district 8 blocks east of Anchorage's modest downtown. Described by a lower 48 journalist as ridiculously laid back, the bar features a mascot, Winston the Penguin, who migrates around the bar in changing costumes and accessories. The bar's own move to a new location in the year 2000 gave it the title of northernmost gay bar in the United States, but not by much, because Alaska's other gay bar is only 1 block south. Founding owner Larry Kaiser passed in 2018, but the Raven continued on under local bartenders Roger Segraves and Scott Stroud. Scott had worked at the Raven since 2000, while Roger had been staff at the competing Mad Myrna's around the corner. Patrons had colluded in their romance, carrying love notes back and forth between the 2 bars when they worked competing shifts, and the pair were determined that the bar survive Larry's passing. As Scott said, we thought we could do it, and so we did, with Roger exclaiming, "This place is gay history. They made the AIDS quilt here for Alaska." And they're not kidding. The bar has crammed display cases and an upstairs storage that are an archive of Anchorage's LGBTQ+ history, with wall decorations that include signs from fallen Anchorage gay bars, including a beautiful stained glass window from the Village, featuring its anchor logo and the words lounge, disco. Gay bars are archives, and they are also sometimes museums. The Raven survived the other COVID-19 pandemic as well by instituting table service, requiring all visitors sign a guest log, and moving activities outdoors to the spacious patio, even when the weather was below freezing. We followed the rules, Roger said, and that gentleman over there at the bar was one of many who said, "This is the only place I will come because you guys are following the rules." When a patron called the bar to say that he tested positive for coronavirus, Scott and Roger could get no advice from public health authorities, so they acted decisively on their own. They shut the bar, and together they called everyone in the visitor logs to alert them. As Scott said, "It's our community. These are our friends. They needed to know." This is the kind of community care that was promoted in gay bars since the early days of HIV/AIDS, perhaps giving gay bars an edge over straight ones in dealing with yet another pandemic. The near ubiquitous description of coronavirus as the pandemic revealed so dramatically the gap between straight people enduring their first pandemic and the rest of us for whom this is merely another. The Raven still offers free condoms in a dispenser on the wall, courtesy of the Alaskan AIDS Assistance Association. The clear plastic of the appliance makes its contents of blue crown condoms openly visible. The irregular pentagon of the dispenser resembles the shape of home plate or an upside-down house. The tip or chimney features a perfect circle through which the corners of condom wrappers poke, easily and discreetly plucked one by one, with gravity moving another inexorably into place. The pile is reassuringly there, but immeasurably diminished. A modest supply of hope and a silent reminder of loss. The 4A's has offered STI testing at the bar, part of gay bars' not quite for-profit missions. A proudly displayed certificate in a dusty case from 4A's lauds founding owner Larry Kaiser for his tireless efforts against the pandemic. Signs for condom use around the bar from the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium urge "Wrap it up, Alaska," reminders that communities of color are always affected more by pandemics, and a sign that is a descendant of Tammy Jo's old thesis. And the Raven is tagged on Instagram with condom packs, a cheeky one featuring a walrus that says, "Keep your oosik covered," a native Alaskan word for a mammal's penis bone. The things you learn when you do research. Condoms mean less today than they did in my gay youth, in the post-PrEP revolution that I have experienced as the most significant event in my gay lifetime. The second, for this asthmatic, was the ban on indoor smoking that occurred at the turn of the millennium. Sorry, same-sex marriage. Now, for their safer sex strategy, many gay men prefer the pills, rigorous medical monitoring, and occasional STI instead of religious condom use. My attachment to free bar condoms says as much about my age and my fear of side effects of medication as it does about Tammy Jo's long ago undergraduate thesis. There were many years and many, many tricks for which I only used free condoms from bars to have sex. Free condoms were in my luggage, in my jackets, and soggy at the bottom of the washing machine from unemptied pants pockets. While the gay bar-related public health campaigns of San Francisco and New York City are justly famous, the northernmost gay bar in the United States also played and continues to play its own important part in HIV prevention that is, to me, sacred work. Tammy Jo didn't know when she started her research that her brother had HIV. By the time she graduated in 1989, he had died. My brother was the kind of person who didn't want to know bad things until he had to, so he never got tested, even though his partner was positive, she remembered. In a way, the continued survival and living joy of the Raven is a monument to Tammy's loss, to Larry Kaiser's life work, and to the loss and the living of so many others. As she recalled, "We lost an entire generation of mostly young men. I haven't read that article since the day it was published. I just wanted my grade, you know?" Describing how her professor had mailed her a copy when it had got published, she said, "It tickled me at the time, but gosh, that was a long time ago." And to the people describing COVID-19 as the pandemic, AIDS probably seems like a long time ago too, but it's not to those of us who are still living it. Some findings. Thank you. The book has 37 more chapters like that, but let me highlight some findings that move across the chapters in the next 10 minutes or so. One of the major findings or trends in gay bars over the last 25 years has been the dramatic decline in gender segregation. The fastest closing types of gay bars over the last 20 years are bars that only serve cisgender men. This has also affected lesbian bars, although the decline in lesbian bars happened between 1987 and 1992, during which time bars serving all genders became the most common type of gay bars. So all the press you read about the decline of lesbian bars is about 30 years too late. And lesbian bars nearly doubled in the 2 years since the pandemic. So the recent Boston Globe piece saying that they're closing is wrong. They are opening, even though we have less than 30 in the country. It was men's kink bars that were hit especially hard alongside lesbian bars, as both struggled to adapt to all gender environments, to the inclusion of trans and gender non-binary people, and to new identities among younger LGBTQ+ folks. But this trend has laid the groundwork for increased inclusion of folks, including bisexual folks, who may not always have felt comfortable in single-sex environments. Some people wonder whether there's been an increase in gay-straight socializing, gay-straight integrated bars. And what's interesting is gay bars in small cities and rural areas have always had lots of straight people in them. And when I talked to these owners, I had thought that they would tell me things like, look, there's only so many queer people in rural Texas. We depend on them for our business. And nobody made an economic argument. Instead, people said, you know, I lived in Dallas for a while, but I moved back to be near my family, to be near my high school friends, and I wasn't going to open a bar where those people didn't feel comfortable hanging out with me and my gay friends. So they really made a kin argument about who was welcome in their spaces. One of the challenges, though, of increasing numbers of straight bars in big city bars, which have recently seen an influx of straight folks, is for queer women who now sometimes find themselves unable to find queer women to date in a bar full of women who are not queer. And long-time research on lesbians' strategies talks about time-space strategies, in that lesbians have to really attend to not just where to go, but at what times to go to certain places. And I think the rest of queer people will have to look to lesbians who have long pioneered these strategies for finding each other. And other queer folks may need to employ them in the future. I describe gay bars as not quite for profits. These are small businesses. There's so little written about small businesses, queer, feminist, or otherwise, or even just from a sociological perspective. Like, I am fascinated by the fact that these function like community spaces, but they have to have liability insurance, they pay an electric bill, they have to have a gas hookup, someone has to mow their lawn, they have to fill the potholes in the parking lot, they have to have an accountant, a janitor, someone's got to fix the roof when there's a hurricane. One owner used his personal credit card to fix his business roof, and then wasn't eligible for FEMA funds because his business and his personal finances were so entangled that it didn't qualify as a business anymore. Many of these owners have day jobs. One of the queer bars that was in Greensboro, just an hour and 15 minutes down the road, she's a social worker, and she worked a 9-to-5 job and then would go open the bar. And social workers are heroes. Their jobs are extremely hard. And I can't imagine going from helping people to serving people all in one 14 or 16-hour day. Which is to say that gay bars often don't pay the bills. Many gay bar owners said, oh, the only way I can afford to do this is I'm a landlord. I have a lot of properties. Or I can only afford to do this because I'm retired from the military and I have a pension. And I do this kind of as a side hustle. And I'm like, this is a side hustle that takes 60 hours a week. And so I want to emphasize how much economic value owners are placing on community. If we listen to old school economists, not contemporary economists, but the idea that every individual is a profit maximizer who wants to earn the most for the least amount of effort, gay bar owners fail. They are not homo economicus, they are homo economicus, because they're putting this value on the place they provide for the community, even when sometimes that place is deeply flawed. And I try in the book to reveal that these places can be deeply transphobic and deeply racist, and yet the owners are also pouring their economic livelihood into a business that will never love them back enough to pay their house bills. I think thinking about gay bars as not quite for profit kind of complicates the anti-capitalist queer critique that bars are vampires sucking the blood of the community. I think that can definitely be the case in big cities. It is absolutely true that there are gay bars that don't give back very much and that are, maybe they own the building since the 1970s and this is pure profit. But those bars are few and far between, and most of the bars in medium or small size cities are these not quite for profit missions. One of the things I highlight in the book are these rare but diverse ownership structures that by which some businesses have ensured their longevity. One example down here is in Roanoke, Virginia. The for-profit gay bar is owned by the nonprofit Pride, so that all the profits from the bar subsidize the Pride celebration every year, and any excess profits go to a foundation for queer homeless youth. Now, that was only made possible because the previous owner of the bar gifted it to the nonprofit. But it also means that the bar is run by an elected committee, which then ensures that the DJ has to play different blocks of music. And that includes country music from 11 to midnight and hip hop from 12 to 1. And that way, all of Roanoke's greater queer community is being served in a way that they might not otherwise be. Another interesting ownership structure also in the South is in Dallas. The bars, 4 of the bars in Dallas are employee owned. It's an employee stock ownership program, so that you have to start these days working in the big nightclub as a bottle collector, as a barback. But after you've worked for 3 years as a barback, you become vested in the company, can move up to be a bartender or a DJ or a promoter or a music coordinator. And when people retire, they sell back the shares they have earned through their labor and earn 6 figures towards their retirement. It's the only gay bar company I know of that gives health insurance, paid vacation, and matching funds for your 401k. It's like a real job. Like, what if gay bars was like a real job rather than something you did on the side? Another example of a different ownership strategy that I'll mention is in State College, Pennsylvania. There, the gay bar is part of a hospitality group of erstwhile straight businesses. So there's a hotel, there's a kind of stuffy restaurant that you take your parents to when they come and visit, or where you take a job candidate when they're from out of town, and a sports bar, an Irish pub, and a gay bar. And what this meant was, during the 2000s, when gay bars were struggling nationwide, the other sister businesses subsidized the gay bar while they figured out what was going on with the business strategy. When they retooled and realized that catering to cisgender white gay men wasn't going to cut it anymore, and they reached out to have a more diverse crowd, now it's the gay bar that subsidizes some of their other struggling businesses. So the conglomerate allowed them to have a much longer time horizon and to not look at earnings on a quarterly basis or a yearly basis, but over a decade basis. And when the conglomerate got sold, it sold to the son of the former owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, who owns a pirate-themed bar in Florida. And they were really worried, like, what is this football family who owns Florida bars going to do to our gay bar? And what they did was they bought out the neighboring business and doubled the size of the gay bar and fixed it up, put in new floors, bought new fixtures. They kept the Scrabble bar. The bar has Scrabble tiles embedded in it. And they kept the TV set because this bar has been showing Jeopardy at 7 p.m. for the last 35 years. It's their tradition. I'll also just say that all of these not quite for profit motives or practices probably helped gay bars survive COVID-19 more effectively than most straight bars. Anecdotally, gay bar crowdfunding was more successful than straight bar crowdfunding. And I won't have the data until 2024 from the Census Bureau about the survival of straight bars, but you can bet I will investigate this because I'm convinced that it was the investment in community in the good times that had economic longevity payoffs in the hard times. And the last finding that I'll leave with you is the radical provincialism of queer lives. I was educated on the coasts, but I grew up in a small town near a secondary city. I now live in a small town near a secondary city. And when I read so much, especially sociology, but sometimes other scholarship on queer lives, it focuses so heavily on 4 large cities that are actually quite exceptional. Having a gay neighborhood is not the be all and end all of queer placemaking. It's an exception that only happens in a handful of cities in the country. Even so, we never study the gay neighborhoods of Seattle or Oklahoma City, which by the way had 3 lesbian bars. It was the only city with more than 3 lesbian bars that wasn't New York City. I went looking for regional trends. I had this hypothesis / fantasy that I was going to find something called the Appalachian gay bar and the Southern gay bar or the Mid-Atlantic gay bar or the New England gay bar, because I was thinking back to the gay bars in Pacific Northwest that I had grown up on. And what I found was that gay bars in small cities, particularly the gay bars that are the only one in their town, are way more similar to each other than they are to the gay bars in Chicago, San Francisco, and New York. And it turns out when you tally them up, there's way more of those outpost gay bars than there are gay bars in the big 4 cities. In other words, if we want to think about what's the most common type of gay bar, we shouldn't think of something like the L Word or on TV, and instead we should think about Glee, where Lima, Ohio has an actual gay bar called Somewhere Over the Rainbow. I mean, very clever naming. Fun fact, I never asked owners why they named their bars what they did, and gay bars have the craziest names. And the reader of the manuscript was like, why is it called Sneakers? Why is it called 5 Cent Decision? And it's like, I just accept that gay bars are weird, and I didn't ask why they were weird. Gay bars in gay neighborhoods are special in that they can subdivide and serve more specialized populations. It was only in cities with gay neighborhoods that I was finding lesbian bars. It was also in cities that had more than 5 gay bars, could one of them be a leather or kink bar? Speaking of being provincial, the whiteness of gay bars can't be overemphasized. The fact that so many researchers see 3 people of color in a room and say that this bar is diverse, but when you actually talk to people of color who are in these spaces, they are not finding them as welcoming as white researchers imagine them to be. And gay bars that serve queer people of color are much more vulnerable and more likely to close than other ones. I went out of my way looking for bars that were owned by or serving people of color, and there's precious few of them. So I think as a community, we need to think about the places that we patronize and support them. And the last thing I'll say, a book that I really love by a sociologist is Japonica Brown Saraceno, who wrote this book called How Places Make Us. And it's about lesbians in small towns. And she found that what being a lesbian means is very different whether if you live in Portland, Maine, compared to San Luis Obispo, California. And what this suggests is that we need to be doubly cautious when we extrapolate from one city and imagine that that's how gay life is in the rest of the country, much less the rest of the world. And part of why I crammed 39 little chapters, and I could have kept going, but my editor said stop. And so I added 2 more and then I stopped. Thank you, Marcella. Is they are so, gay bars were so individual. As a sociologist, my job is to find trends, but I go to Johnson City, in Appalachia, Johnson City, Tennessee, in Appalachia, and the owner would say, thank God for the young people, old gay people don't go out. And then I drive 3 hours down the road in Asheville, and they'd be like, thank God for the old people, young people don't go out. These are both bars in Appalachia. They're only 3 hours apart, and yet the populations that were patronizing them were so radically different. And I use the example of Oklahoma City as a city that can support 3 lesbian bars at a time when San Francisco and LA and Boston had 0 lesbian bars, as an example of what it means to be a lesbian in Oklahoma City means going to the potluck at the lesbian bar. Like, they are party girls in a way that you're just not if you're in different parts of the city or different parts of the country. So I think driving around the country made me especially humble about my ability to make generalizations. And instead, I present you with this kaleidoscope of different places so that you can maybe see things I didn't and draw your own conclusions. So, thank you all for coming so much, and I would love to take some questions. Hit me.
And this is a very cool picture in color. Have you considered exploring international food bars at all?
I love the idea of exploring international gay bars. I found I knew so little about our own country, the regions. Like, I had no idea about the Emerald Coast. Have you ever been to the Emerald Coast? Also known as Floribama, the border between Florida and Alabama along the Panhandle. It used to be called, oh, it had some derogatory name, the Redneck Riviera, but they rebranded it as the Emerald Coast. And that is why one of the most successful gay bars in the South is in Panama City Beach. Like, just learning that local history, I don't know enough even about Canada, which is just there to do justice to that. So really, I hope that someone who has those roots and that deep knowledge can do that work themselves. Although I am thinking about doing this for Finland because it only has 7 gay bars, the whole country. And one of them's government owned. It's a government service and it's subsidized by the slot machine authority. So gambling grannies are funding sapphic parties. I just think I want to know more. Anyway, so thank you.
And then also, have you been in contact with any of the owners / like, what have their responses been to your book? They read the book, you know a lot of them read the book.
So for all of the owners who are featured in the book, I sent drafts of the chapters to them. And some of them have never spoken to me since. Some of them offered to throw me parties. Some of them were so excited. So Troop 429 in Norwalk, Connecticut, got corporate sponsorship from a local brew pub to hire the drag queen and burlesque artist who I described in the book. And they threw this massive party and we sold 50 copies of the book and it was like a tremendous night. And then they hired a professional photographer to take pictures. So now I have these professional photos of me doing stuff. I mean, like Dacha in DC that is owned by my first boyfriend. Dima threw an open bar. So like randos came from a newspaper ad and got to come to it, but there was an open bar for 3 hours and staff because he was so flattered to be included. So, you know, it really ranged from, you know, the owner who thinks I did her dirty because in the draft, I pointed out some things she said that could be perceived as racist. And she said I was making her look racist. So I took them out and I moved them to another section of the book and anonymized them because one of the compromises that I had to make when naming people by name was I had these competing ethical demands. One is to do no harm, and one is to reveal injustice and inequality where I see it. And in that case, I anonymized. And as you know, if you've read it, 3 of the chapters don't name the bar because I didn't want to call anyone in particular out and make racism be pinned to one place and instead have racism be this force that can be anywhere.
Is that something that you will enter your interviews with? Like, will you introduce that ever as an option to your subjects? Like, you can elect to be anonymous or non-anonymous in this before you speak to them? Yeah.
Yes, all of them had to explicitly initial that I could quote them by name. And then I sent everything to them so that they could see what they had said. And in particular, the most vexing chapter was the one, I call her Paula. Paula's bar, there at least a third of the people were people of color in the bar, and at least a third of the people were gender expansive. But I found Paula incredibly racist and transphobic, if a jolly person. And so I knew I had to profile this bar, but I didn't know what to do about it. And so I thought I'll just sit on it till the book is nearly ready, and then I'll go back to her. Language about trans folks was evolving very fast in 2018. And so I thought maybe this could be a story of personal growth. Maybe she could give me some reactions. And when I went to talk to her, she had died suddenly. So then I decided for that one that I would just anonymize it. And some of my colleagues feel that I protected a terrible person. And I was raised that you don't speak ill of the dead. And she didn't have a chance to speak back to her earlier self. So that was the compromise I made. But yes, the press wanted to see my informed consent forms for every person. And they had signed that they would be quoted by name. Francis.
I was gonna ask the question you asked about methodology and personal, but if you wanna ask it instead, because I would ask you.
Sure, I don't remember exactly how I worded things, I know you read the thing you wrote, but yeah, I was, and I know you said earlier that you didn't want it to be a strictly academic work, but you wanted to be for like person student farm. But I was just wondering, because I felt like you were pretty vulnerable throughout the work with just like your own experiences and your own like history. And I guess I was curious how you straddled that line of like professionalism, like inserting yourself too much in the narrative.
Uncomfortably. Like I was raised very Lutheran and you don't talk about yourself. And yet I teach feminist methodologies. There's no position from nowhere. Like, how did my positionality guide the story? So I took what was already, I'm reticent about my personal life, but I decided when did you as a reader need to know who was telling you this story so that you could weigh for yourself? Is it only because I'm a guy that someone was willing to tell me those things? Or was I probably missing things because I'm white? So rather than do the kind of lame positionality statement where I say, as a white cisgender middle-class man from the Pacific Northwest, which identities do you include? I instead scatter the details throughout. And in terms of inserting myself more, that really came from my agent. And it's very hard to get an agent. to get an agent, you send what's called a query. You send a query letter. And I queried 63 agents before one of them said yes. And my agent said, she asked me what were my goals. And I said, I want a broad readership. I want it to be written. And she's like, you have written a 40-page chapter. Each chapter is 40 pages and it has 7 chapters. That's an academic book. That's not what people read. And she said, you are never present in the manuscript very much, and people want to know more about you. Now, when we started trying to sell the manuscript, or the idea of the manuscript, the proposal, many presses said, we'll do it if you make it a road trip book. And currently there is a book called Moby Dyke by Krista Burton. It's great. It's a road trip book. It's like, let's go on a lesbian road trip to every lesbian bar that's open. And oh my God, the adventures that happen on the road. And I love reading those books. And in fact, Samantha Allen's Real Queer America, which is her Mormon trans road trip across the country, like that kind of inspired me. But maybe it's because I'm a sociologist, but I feel that other people are fundamentally more interesting than I am. And that I had this incredible privilege to hear 130 stories, and I felt a responsibility to share those. So that was the balancing act. And I think I tell you as a reader, sometimes when I'm pulling the curtain saying you don't get any more information, I say explicitly, my mom is going to read this. And so there is way less sex in here than otherwise. When I was copy editing the manuscript, I came down for breakfast and she was reading the chapter about where I lose my virginity. And my mom and I do not have those conversations. So that was the red line over which I wouldn't. But, gay bars are sexy places, and there is too little sex in there. And gay bars have poppers, and I only mentioned them twice. One of my friends pointed that out, and I was like, well, okay, someone else needs to write the stories of poppers in gay bars. And there are so many stories. There are 2 poppers books, but they're not about the bars. Anyways, but yes, thank you for that question. I wrestled with that. I rolled around on the floor with it. I talked at length with friends about it. And it's a compromise. It's just a fundamental compromise. You had a question in the back? Yeah.
Oh, I have several questions. I have so many questions, but where to begin? Okay, so there's this wave right now happening of books like Moby Dyke, as you mentioned. There's a Jeremy
Atherton Lynn,
Yeah.
Gay Bar, Why We Went Out.
and then there's
Lucas
forthcoming book.
Hildebrand's book coming
Right.
out, The Bars Are Ours.
Do you think these are all sort of like Lynn's book is sort of writing elegy, like in the past tense, Why We Went Out, and then both yours and Lucas's books are present tense, right? So is there the sense that these books are kind of all happening now as like a pushback against this narrative that they gave us? Like, could you say more about kind of how you think about your work and conversation with this like overarching conversation, both in the popular media and in the sort of small media?
Multiple presses passed on my proposal because they said, the memoir on gay bars is already being written. It will come out in 2 years. That was when Jeremy Atherton Lynn hit Publishers Weekly, and that just killed any interest because the owner said, or the publishers were telling my agent, there's only room for 1 gay bar book. Now, it's clear that's not the case, that people have them. I just know from teaching young people have an insatiable curiosity about gay bars, in part because they're not old enough to go to them. Now, my first gay bar was a 16 and up nightclub that didn't serve alcohol. So does that even count as a gay bar? I think all of us had started on this path before. So there is definitely something in the zeitgeist that queer people are interested in our places. We all are on our phones. We all are on our screens. And yet, I think the pandemic reminded us that there is some fundamental human need to be in the presence of other people, including people like us. Now, who gets included in the like us? I think is where the chips fall. But I have read some of Lucas's We Talk. I'm on a panel with Krista. I haven't met her, but I interviewed her for Lit Hub. I'm really excited. I think there's room for all of these. Like Atherton Lynn's book, like there were parts of it I was like, this is amazing. And there were other parts where I was like, too much armpits. There's a whole chapter about smelly armpits. And I was like, what's this have to do with gay bars? Like, whatever. But you know, that's what a memoir does. So I think there's let 1,000 flowers bloom. And let us buy a drink for each one.
Sort of, I find it really interesting how the history of gay bars and the historical memory kind of survives in neighborhoods in larger, actually larger like that. So like the stud went under and now it's coming back, and the Eagle closed and then it came back. So there are also kind of parties that try to recreate the atmosphere of all like leather bars and things like this. So yeah, I guess having not read the book, I'm interested in how that role of kind of nostalgia plays part. Because I think a lot of queer people have the attraction to the camera and bars and their posture, like their shot.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm interested, so kind of broad, but
I hear, well, and first I'm going to pick up the role of pop-up parties. So Amin Ghaziani has a book coming out in November from Princeton called Long Live Queer Nightlife or something like that. And his argument is that bars are racist, sexist, and transphobic, and pop-up parties are inherently progressive, and that actually we should stop paying attention to bars and we should pay attention to pop-up parties. I think that argument is wrong-headed because bars owned by trans people of color are welcoming to trans people of color. It's not the bar's problem, it's the ownership's problem, and it's the problem of the patrons inside the bars. So, but plenty of cities have only ever had queer pop-up parties, and Facebook and Twitter ended up being a boon for these places. When Joplin, Missouri lost their Equality Rocks, what sprung up was a drag show at a bowling alley once a month, and that was their queer nightlife. Trans people, women, and people of color have often only ever had a pop-up party. I don't think that that's necessarily progressive, because many times they are longing for, and maybe even have a nostalgia for, a lesbian bar. Japonica Brown Saraceno has this great article where she interviews young lesbians who are doing art projects about lesbian bars, where young people have this incredible nostalgia for a lesbian bar, and it turns out the lesbian bar they have nostalgia for is a 1960 bar from Buffalo, New York that was detailed in boots of leather, slippers of gold. In other words, one academic book has set a whole generation of lesbians to fixate on white working class lesbian bars of Buffalo in 1960. Jack Gieseking, in his book, A Queer New York, also finds lesbians in New York were getting blue stars tattooed on their wrists because the lesbians in 1960s Buffalo had a blue star tattooed on their wrist. So no book has been more influential in lesbian bar nostalgia than this one book. I think Heather Love and other queer theorists would say that there's something inherently nostalgic about being queer, that most of us are born in a family that is not queer. Some of us are lucky, but most of us are not. And so we're always looking to the past for models for what we should be. I want someone to write me a book about queer generations, because every generation complains that the gay generation before it doesn't appreciate what we went through, and they don't understand it, and they don't get the camp references, and all this stuff on lesbian generations. Every time a historian goes and looks for these clear divides between the bar dykes and the feminists, they're all mixed up. It's not generations, it's seeds. And so I like the nostalgia, but I also, and I bring up Japonica's work because she shows that the young lesbians who are nostalgic for boots of leather and slippers of gold also want trans-inclusive places. They also want places that are open to and welcoming of everyone of all races. So we can look to the past for inspiration and carry our own values into it. And I think that's particularly a queer misuse of history in a positive sense.
I would also just shout out Kenny.
Oh, yes, yes. While we, yes, going slow.
Feels right.
Feels right, thank you.
Because slow-mo is more the truth.
Gotcha.
I have a question which you may address in the talk in the part about methods, because sociology. For the rest of this way, like, what is a gay bar?
For the purpose of this study, a gay bar is a bar. I would define a gay bar, it reproduces queer culture. And it is incredibly slippery between a straight bar that has gay people in it. I write about Dacha, a bar in Washington, D.C., that has a camp mural. The bar staff wear pink tank tops. There's rainbow flags, but it's not a gay bar. But it's full of gay people, and it looks really gay, but it's not gay. So for me, I was using what did people say about it? If it was publicly identified as a gay bar by other people, then it would count as a gay bar. And some of these were actual bars that were owned by gay people. They didn't have rainbow flags, but all the queer people in town knew that that was a place they could hang out. There wasn't necessarily same-sex affection. But it turns out that what that place is looks quite different in New York City than in Cleveland. The Damron Guide has a code for gay-friendly straight bar. And it turns out that code is only used in small cities and rural places. So we started, we counted them, we coded them, but it turns out there is no gay-friendly straight bar in New York City.
Wow.
Of course there are. In fact, maybe even most of them are. But so when it came to us, we, for the gay bar censuses that we were doing in 2021 and 2023, no matter what the bar said, if everyone's using hashtag gay bar on Instagram, five instances, then it's a gay bar. And if they're saying hashtag lesbian bar and it doesn't say it on their website, we decided if a place had a night that was for a group at least once a week, not once a month, not once a quarter, we decided that that would make people feel comfortable to go there on other nights of the week. That was an arbitrary, not so arbitrary, it was the best we could do with Instagram.
It's really like interesting the concept where the bar closed during the pandemic, but there's like Surf Club, which is like a crappy dive bar that has a trans pipeline, right? Like, but then the bartenders are gross. So it's just anyway, in the context of small city, like or next to a big city like Legend, which is like a gay bar, you know. Anyway.
Yes, it doesn't.
The narcissistic provincial question.
But I'm a provincial person who loves the radical provincialism of queer people. Yeah, you know, so many. I cataloged all the ways that the gay bar owners identify their bars, and I report them in their chapters. And many of them say, this is not a lesbian bar, this is a women's bar. And you look around and I'm like, all these women share one thing in common, and it's each other. But you call it what you want, or, you know, some bars in Appalachia in the Midwest, in the South would say we're an everybody bar. But in the context of a small town in Indiana, welcoming everybody was itself the radical thing. So we were like, gay people keep putting hashtag gay bar on this place that says we're an everybody bar, but they have pride celebrations there. There's a weekly drag show. It's reproducing queer culture. So that's how we also distinguish between straight bars that have a gay pride flag. If they're not doing fundraisers for top surgery, if they're not doing AIDS charity work, then they're not reproducing queer culture.